Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are reading a short piece out of A Testament of Hope, the speeches and writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today we're reading a piece called Eulogy for the Martyred Children, and it's just a little over 2 pages, so bear with me here. The Reverend Dr. King delivered this sermon at the funeral of the little girls who were killed on the 15th of September 1963 by a bomb as they attended the Sunday school of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. This afternoon, we gather in the quiet and this sanctuary to pay our last tribute of respect to these beautiful children of God. They entered the stage of history just a few years ago, and in the brief years that they were privileged to act on this mortal stage, they played their parts exceedingly well. Now the curtain falls. They move through the exits. The drama of their earthly life comes to a close. They are now committed back to that eternity from which they came. These children, unoffending, innocent, and beautiful, were the victims of one of the most vicious, heinous crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. Yet they died nobly. They were martyred heroines of a holy crusade for freedom and human dignity. So they have something to say to us in their death. They have something to say to every member of the gospel who has remained silent behind the safe security of stained glass windows. They have something to say to every politician who has fed the constituents the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. They have something to say to a federal government that has compromised with the undemocratic practices of Southern Dixiecrats and the blatant hypocrisy of right-wing Northern Republicans. They have something to say to every Negro who passively accepts the evil system of segregation and stands on the sidelines in the midst of the mighty struggle for justice. They say to each of us, black and white alike, that we must substitute courage for caution. They say to us that we must we must be concerned. Sorry. They say to us we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, and the philosophy which produced the murderers. Their deaths say to us we must work passionately and unrelentingly to make the American dream a reality. So they did not die in vain. God still has a way of wringing good out of evil. History has proven over and over again that unmerited suffering is redemptive. The innocent blood of these little girls will serve as the redemptive force that will bring new light to this dark city. The Holy Scripture says, "A little child shall lead them." The death of these little children may lead our whole Southland from the low road of man's inhumanity to man to the high road of peace and brotherhood. These tragic deaths may lead our nation to substitute an aristocracy of character for an aristocracy of color. The spilt blood of these innocent girls may cause the whole citizenry of Birmingham to transform the negative extremes of a dark past into the positive extremes of a bright future. Indeed, this tragic event may cause the white South to come to terms with its conscience. So, in spite of the darkness of this hour, we must not despair. We must not become bitter, nor must we harbor the desire to retaliate with violence. We must not lose faith in our white brothers. Somehow we must believe that that the most misguided among them can learn to respect the dignity and worth of all human personality. May I now say a word to you, the members of the bereaved families. It is almost impossible to say anything that can console you at this difficult hour and remove the deep clouds of disappointment which are floating in your mental skies. But I hope you can find a little consolation from the universality of this experience. Death comes to every individual. There is an amazing democracy about death. It is not aristocracy for some of the people, but a democracy for all of the people. Kings die and beggars die. Rich men die and poor men die. Old people die and young people die. Death comes to the innocent, and it comes to the guilty. Death is the irreducible common denominator of all men. I hope you can find some consolation from Christianity's affirmation that death is not the end. Death is not a period that ends the great sentence of life, but a comma that punctuates it to more lofty significance. Death is not a blind alley that leads the human race into a state of nothingness, but an open door which leads man into life eternal. Let this daring faith, this great invincible surmise, be your sustaining power during these trying days. At times, life is hard as crucible steel. It has its bleak and painful moments, like the ever-flowing waters of a river. Life has its moments of drought and its moments of flood. Like the ever-changing cycle of the seasons, life has its soothing warmth of the summers and the piercing chill of its winters. But through it all, God walks with us. Never forget that God is able to lift you from from fatigue of despair to the buoyance of hope, and transform dark and desolate alleys or valleys into sunlit paths of inner peace. Your children did not live long, but they lived well. The quality of their lives was disturbingly small, but the quality of their lives was magnificently big. Where they died and what they were doing when death came will remain a marvelous tribute to each of you and an eternal epitaph to each of them. They died, not in a den or dive, nor were they hearing and telling filthy jokes at the time of their death. They died within the sacred walls of the church after discussing a principle as eternal as love. Shakespeare had Horatio utter some beautiful words over the dead body of Hamlet. I paraphrase those words today as I stand over the last remains of these lovely girls. Good night, sweet princesses. May the light of angels take thee to thy eternal rest. Epilogue. The doors of the 16th Street Baptist Church reopened on Sunday, June the 7th, 1964. The re-entry sermon was preached by a white clergyman and the Reverend H.O. Hester, Secretary of the Department of Missions, Alabama Baptist Convention. This was published off print in the library of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, Georgia. So yeah, Dr. King talking about hoping their deaths lead to something better, lead to a better change. So it was almost a year when the church reopened. The bombing happened on the 15th of September 1963, and the church reopened June the 7th, 1964. To show you how much of an impact it actually had. But yeah, the infamous, he gives a sermon on the 4 little girls who died in the infamous bombing of the Birmingham church. Yeah. That's all I'm going to really say about this topic. So as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.